through an artist, Hunter Biden, with no established credentials to warrant such enormous profits. So got us thinking about some of their children who've made life a little bit difficult for their presidential parents in the past. Presidential historian and former advisor to President George H.W. Bush, Doug Weed, and presidential historian and Reagan biographer Craig Shirley. Thank you very much both for joining us. All right, so Doug, what's your take on this?
Hey, Carl, good to see you. Well, presidential children have been extremely successful or great failures, and some cursed. I mean, William Henry Harrison Jr. dies young as an alcoholic. So does John Tyler Jr. They die in freak accidents, like Andrew Jackson in a hunting accident, Andrew Jackson Jr. And Calvin Coolidge Jr. dies after a freak accident on the White House tennis courts, JFK Jr. in the plane crash. Yet they achieve great things. Webb Hayes founded Union Carbide. They're some of the greatest authors in American history. FDR had a similar experience to what we're seeing right now with Hunter Biden. His son, Jimmy Roosevelt, was selling insurance, and the insurance company changed all of the policies so that he would get the royalties from the greatest policies. The nation became outraged. Laws are passed from time to time to try to correct this, but greed has a way of finding these presidential children. The big exception being the Trumps.
Yeah, exactly.
You said it, but just imagine. I see Ivanka out there handing meals to poor people in the hot sun day after day. She and Jared and her father taking no salary. It's pretty big contrast.
Right. I mean, the only artist on display here is the fact that Democrats have perfected the art of getting around logistics and ethical laws for years now. So, Craig, I mean, do we see any of this making any waves? Is it going to get anywhere? Is this ever going to, like, is Hunter Biden ever going to have to answer for this, or his father?
Well, I think we have to deal with the fact first, Carl, is that Hunter Biden is a very poor artist. I mean, these are, these are the equivalents of adult finger paintings. Doug is right about presidential children down through the ages. You've had ne'er-do-wells and you've had great people. Teddy Roosevelt had a daughter, Alice, who was very carefree, partied from one end of Washington to the other, and was very troublesome. And at one point, he was told he needed to get his carefree daughter, Alice, under control. And he responded, quote, "I can be president of the United States or I can control Alice. I cannot possibly do both."
I mean, it's fair, but here's the thing: it's like there was a Picasso painting that sold for about $125,000, $125,000 in the same week that Hunter Biden sold one of these blowpipe paintings for $500K. So, I mean, Doug, what do you think about this in the long term?
I want to meet the moron who just paid $500,000 for this trash.
Yeah, that should definitely be known, because if they're not going to tell us who these donors are, I mean, it could be the Saudi prince who all of a sudden ends up with a nuclear warhead, for all I know. Craig, we see this apparent double standard, though. We were talking about it. Any child, I mean, literally, if any child from the Trumps ever did this, it would be pandemonium. Tenfold. Why? I mean, like, we actually, to the viewers, I don't want to insult you out there, you know why they're not covering this, but how do we get it covered?
Well, we're covering it now, and the alternative media is covering it. I interrupted Doug, and I beg your pardon, Doug, because he had some valid points I know to make. But presidential is just troublesome all the time. They're more trouble than sometimes they're worth. But also, you've had heroes. Quentin Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt's oldest son, was killed in World War I in a plane crash. 4 of Roosevelt's sons all died and all served in World War II. Didn't die, but served. And of course, Reagan once wrote in his diaries he said, insanity is hereditary. You catch it from your children.
Yeah, I mean, it is a reflection of the parents' day, I say. Doug, I want to ask you about Robert Lincoln. What's your take on how that plays out versus what's going on now?
Robert Lincoln was one of the richest men in the world. He was very popular after the death of Abraham Lincoln. He became the president of the Pullman Company, which was like the General Motors of its day. Heads of state would come to the United States, and they'd visit the president, and then they'd peel off and meet with Robert Todd Lincoln, kind of like meeting with Bill Gates. Very interesting character in history. You can't really compare him to Hunter Biden. He became a member of the cabinet of 2 different presidents of the United States, and some felt he could have been president himself. You know, Carl, 7 sons of presidents ran for president, so it was kind of like feast or famine. Either a president's son turns out to be absolutely corrupt, as we saw with Jimmy Roosevelt. Understand, Jimmy Roosevelt, FDR would bring in these wealthy donors to visit him in the Oval Office with Jimmy Roosevelt there so he could sell him an insurance policy. And the nation became outraged and saw this as complete fraud, and they shut it down. And that's what they need to do right now. We can't have this kind of corruption.
No, I completely agree. The Historian Dream Team, Doug Weed, Craig Shirley, we appreciate you joining us tonight.
You bet, Carl. Thank you. Have a good weekend.
All right, you too. Coming up, Joe is once again getting caught doing weird